And David is managing director of several companies, in particular, China Manufacturing Consultants. He also works with a friend of mine in Southeast Asia, where they do third-party audits. I would describe David as someone who you give him a plot of land and he will build a factory for you. I think that's best describes David. David has worked for Chrysler in the US, correct?
Yes, and General Motors.
General Motors in
Yes.
assembly. You've worked for their assembly plant in Mexico too, right?
Mexico, Germany, and Quebec, Canada.
Wow, that's amazing. So basically, David can build you a factory. I think that's...
And we're doing that for people right now, which is nice.
Wow. Okay. So tonight we can go anywhere you like, and students, please, this is our second last week of the course. So let's have some fun tonight. You're allowed to ask questions. Elaine, yes, you can ask questions. Okay. So we'll have some fun, and we can a brief introduction to David. David, you're currently in Taiwan as we speak.
Yes.
You're normally based in Suzhou in China, correct?
China, correct.
Which is just out of Shanghai. And you spend a lot of time giving advice to businesses all around the world about, well, part of the supply chain management, but in particular, factory management.
Both factory and supply chain. Supply chain is quite critical.
Yes. So would you like to tell the students what you've been doing this year, David?
Sure. So basically, we have companies in North America. Singapore is where our headquarters is. It used to be Hong Kong. Now we've moved to Singapore, but we still have a Hong Kong company that owns the China company. Our Singapore company now owns companies in the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Vietnam, Nigeria, as well as China, the Chinese company. And we do business in Indonesia, Malaysia. We're doing business now in 11 countries. We have consultants and people from India and Indonesia, Malaysia, all over the world. So it's kind of nice. It's fun. I'm not rich yet, but I'm working on it. Actually, I'm old. So my son, who now works for me, he wants me to be rich so that when I die, he can have all the money. He said, that's a good thing. So basically, we work with manufacturing. We have put ourselves into a level where what we call ourselves the floor level. In other words, there's a lot of really good consulting companies, people like that you've maybe heard of, like McKinsey or Bain or Boston Consulting. There's people out of, Hong Kong and things like that. They're more strategy type consulting companies. And we do a little bit of that, and we can do that, but we wanted to be different. We wanted to work with the people on the factory floor. We wanted to work with the supply chain, at the ERP system. How do you plan? How do you set things up? So that's how we've differentiated ourselves. So we're, I guess, what we would call the practical people. We come in and we actually make it happen. We've even beat out people like Boston Consulting and Bain and McKenzie, A.T. Kearney and things like that for things, because they always want to make really good PowerPoints, and we want to make really good processes to control. So that's kind of our differentiation.
David, when you go into a factory or you're called into an assignment, what's the most common challenge? Oh, okay, there's two challenges. It is the perceived problem that your client has, and then there's the actual problem that you actually see.
So there's usually three big problems. You guys are a supply chain group, so I'll talk about that second and third. The first is that people don't really understand their problems. You're young guys, I'm sure quite intelligent. And one of the biggest things you're going to get when you first go out into business, and it'll hurt you a little bit, but please don't let it bother you, is we've been doing this for 40 years. Don't you get it? And so one of our biggest problems is that people say we've been doing this for 40 years. And if I'm in a rude mood, which I'm usually not, but sometimes I say, yes, I can tell you've been doing it that way for 40 years. The key is to open up your mind to see what somebody really needs, to really get into the goals and objectives of what the company's trying to do. The second thing we always see is warehouse destruction. People say, oh yeah, we manage our warehouse well. And I ask them, how many turns of inventory do you have? And people don't know that answer. And I go, how old is the inventory here? Only a couple months. And every time I go into a warehouse, every time, 100% of the time, I can go do what I call the dust test. I can wipe my finger across a box and find my finger is 100% dirty, knowing that that box has been there for more than a couple of years.
Wow.
And just so you know, inventory, and you can read this from different Harvard Business Review, other things, probably Neil's talked to you about this. On average, it's different from industry to industry. The cost of inventory is 25% of what you're holding. So if you're holding $1 million in inventory, it's costing you $250,000 a year to hold it. And that is cost you can't get back because the customer won't pay for that. All right. And then the third thing we see is people don't plan. They're really into batches. They really like to make a whole bunch of units and then throw it into the warehouse. And when somebody calls for it, they can build it, which is another gigantic waste of money in inventory. I worked for Foxconn for 3 years, and the factory that I had did $3.5 billion. I was the general manager of North America, and we were doing $3.5 billion. And when I got there, we had, just for one factory, we had 5 warehouses.
Wow. And
we got it down to 2 because it was just a waste. And this is really where supply chain people, and the guy who was working for me, supply chain, was really bright. He's now vice president of a very large company. Quite frankly, supply chain is really important because there's tons and tons of money that just lays on the floor unless you correctly manage your supply chain. And that includes quality and everything else. I mean, it's just not planning and delivering it. It's, do you have a quality supplier? You know, are the people good? Are they doing what they want to do?
You mentioned inventory. In some ways, true to say that people see inventory as a way of overcoming their inability to forecast demand.
Correct.
Okay.
So inventory is a crutch. If you have a lot of inventory sitting around, you have it there because you can't manage your processes correctly. So when you try to get somebody to eliminate inventory and say, hey, you don't need all this inventory, they'll tell you, oh, no, I got to have it. What if, what if, what if? Well, if you have that many what ifs in your company, that means you don't really know how to manage your company. And I'm sure one of the things Neil's talked to you about, and one of the things we'll talk about, especially as we go into one of the topics Neil mentioned to me is what's going on with COVID, is systems. Do you have systems? Do you have processes? Do you have things that create value? And are you creating value by helping develop those systems very, very well? Inventory is a crutch for bad management. It's as simple as that. So let me tell you about the auto industry where I came from. In the beginning, the auto industry, and I'll give you a specific example, a specific factory. I managed the Dodge Durango factory in Newark, Delaware. We did $7.5 billion of cars a year.
Dodge Durango, that's an SUV, that's a major pickup, right?
It's a big SUV.
Yeah. Okay.
And we did $7 to $7.5 billion of Dodge Durangos. We made one a minute, average cost of $40,000, one a minute. When we first started it, because the company was so involved in inventory, we had $440 million of inventory on the factory floor at any given minute.
Wow.
The people involved, we got involved and we says, we're going to fix this. We're going to go to just in time. We're going to set things up correctly. Now think about this. We went from $440 million of inventory on the factory floor at any given minute to less than $50 million of inventory on the factory floor. And we had 85 kilometers of conveyor line that we had trucks on at all times. So we had 2,000 trucks in the factory with less than $50 million of inventory, which means we had almost zero inventory. things were coming into our factory every 20, 30 minutes, and we were putting it on the cars and they were moving on and going out. And we saved the company doing that over $180 million.
Did they have to improve their forecasting to make that line as smoother possible?
Yes, of course. Forecasting, and there's 5 levels of forecasting usually. You know, there's manufacturing forecasting, sales forecasting, the purchasing forecasting. What are the other 2? I wish my wife was here because she's the expert on that. She works for me, or I work for her, as she says. But the other ones are supply forecasting, and then obviously the customer forecasting, what the customer wants when we have it. And you know, you can take a 75, 80% accurate forecast and turn it into just-in-time inventory.
Wow. Well, that's amazing there. And just on that, like we're talking about factories, and you've had experience in managing the factories in different countries. Like you've managed factory in Mexico, USA, Germany,
China.
Do you see a difference?
No. A lot of people like to say, and you guys will get this a lot because you're from different countries and you're going to go to different countries. Maybe, maybe not. But people will always try to tell you something stupid. You don't understand the culture. Yeah, you're right. Maybe I don't understand the culture, but I do understand that inventory gets put onto a product at the right time, at the right place, with the right quality. And it doesn't matter what the culture is. The culture is the fun part. You get to know people, enjoy people. The systems have nothing to do with the culture. Now, yes, when you manage people, you might have to understand culture. You know, Indians think differently than Malaysians, let's say, who think differently than Chinese, but that's just smart management on your part, understanding people's personalities and how they work so that you can help them motivate themselves. Okay. But from a systems perspective, there's no different in any country. They all work the same. I've worked everywhere. And the funniest excuse is you don't understand Mexican. And then when they really can't get you onto the systems, they tell you you can't understand the law of the country. Oh, no, you don't understand Mexican law. You don't understand Chinese law. So he says, Chinese law tells me that I can't make product with one-piece flow at the right time, at the right quality. I go, show me the law, please. Wow. It'll take you a little while to get to that place in your careers because you'll have to have some confidence. And when you first get out of college and university, it's that confidence isn't normally there. But think about that. Ask that question when people tell you stupid things. Why? What do you mean? What are you talking about? And maybe you can't say that to your boss because he'll fire you or be mad at you, but you can think about it to yourself and use your own intellect to change your boss's mind, change other people's mind. But you will hear that, especially in the kind of things you guys are trying to do, international business and things like that. People are always going to make excuses to you, tons of excuses. And you know, your ability to critically think and sit back and go, well, why are they saying that? Maybe they're right. I'm not saying they're never right, but critically thinking is critical for you to be able to do well in your career and help your company make money and have a good reputation.
David, just continuing on this factory, like there's a lot of discussion even before this year, partly caused by the trade war, about factory relocation, and factories are moving out of China. We can pick on China, but just, I think one thing I wanted to stress, or in some of the conversations I've had with the media, is that it's not that easy to pick up a factory in one country and put it into another country.
No, building and setting up a new factory is the hardest thing to do. I have built and started up more automotive factories than anybody in the world. I've done 5. And now there's people who built more, there's people who have managed more, but nobody has built and managed as many as me. And an automotive factory costs about $1.5 billion to construct, just to construct the factory. Like I said, it has about 85 miles of conveyor. There's about 3,000 to 4,000 people. There's all kinds of things. There's the environmental of the paint shop. There's SO2. I mean, the environmental stuff is unbelievably difficult. All these things have to do, and this isn't just true with automotive factories. It's true with almost any factory. I'll give you a really specific example. I had a customer. He had a factory that was building bindings for snowboards.
Mm.
And he was the #1 binding supplier to a very famous Italian snowboarding company in the world. And his supplier was going to move the factory out of Shenzhen north to Huizhou. And the guy said, "Oh, it's easy. I just take the machine, I put it into the new factory, I plug it in, and I start running."
Mm.
And I explained to the guy, it doesn't work that way. The minute you move the machine, everything changes. Well, sadly to say, my friend, who I tried to help, lost all his business. They couldn't make it. The Italian person went to another factory, and he called me up and he says, "I thought the guy was right. You just plugged in the machine. It really doesn't work that way." And it doesn't. Factory setup is interesting. It's fun. It's hard. It's 16, 17-hour days sometimes, but it is quite rewarding.
Mm. I would expect that you would look at the network of supply when deciding where to locate a factory, David.
Of course. Supply chain is critical. You know, right now, for example, everybody's saying, let's go to Vietnam. But I've had customers go to Vietnam and then leave Vietnam because there's no supply chain yet. You know, the infrastructure isn't there. You know, when it comes to electronics, there's nobody better than China. When it comes to other things, you know, other countries do really, really well. So when people go to Vietnam or to Indonesia, because I have another client that wants to move to Indonesia right now, and the simple thing is great, we'll move there. I have no problem with that, but let's work out the supply chain issues prior to you moving. Let's make sure, how do you get these parts? How do you get stuff? Because always remember this, the supply chain is your product. Whatever piece you're putting on to the car, if it's an engine or a seat, it says Mercedes on it. It doesn't say made by seat manufacturer #1, or, you know, it's yours. So if it can't be done with high quality in a good amount of time and be on time and set it up, it's Mercedes that loses. It's not the supplier. It's so the supply chain is an incredibly critically important thing, because most companies assemble. They leave the specific supply chains to the groups who mold, you know, die cast, put together PCB boards, things like that. And then, you know, like in the car industry, we assembled the body, painted it, and then put all the, you know, all the stuff in it. And that's normal. So the supply chain is ultimately one of the most critical things.
Recently, we broke our course up into 2 parts. For the first half, we talked a lot about the small buyer and, you know, how they could do sourcing, associated with Amazon selling, things like that. Then the last 3 weeks, we moved to the large buyers. And I think the biggest difference, and it's a point that you were just realizing just now, was that the first big difference with large buyers, even though they might have more power, is their huge reputation risk if something goes wrong in the customer's hands.
Correct.
And I think
you take a look at I don't know if you guys know about this, but there was a Japanese company that made airbags, and this was about 4 or 5 years ago. But there was a Japanese company that made airbags, and they made airbags a certain way. And it turned out that the way they made them, even though engineering wise it logically made sense, the airbags kept exploding without something happening, or they wouldn't go at all. So there were 2 companies in particular. One of them was Toyota, unfortunately, because it was Japanese for Toyota, and one of them, I believe, the other one was BMW, used this supplier almost exclusively for their airbags. And they had to recall 6 years of vehicles and put in new airbags. And just so you know, an airbag costs about $400 an airbag. And if you go 5 years back for a company like BMW and Toyota, you're talking probably about 40 million cars.
Wow.
So, you're talking 40 million cars that you, and then the repair cost would probably cost another $500-600. So, multiply basically $1,000 by 40 million, and you got the cost of those companies of what happened by having a bad supplier.
Wow. And the reputation that goes with that, unaccounted.
And of course the brand reputation, because Toyota was becoming the #1 car supplier in the world, and now they're not. And that was one of the reasons they're not anymore.
Wow.
It's going back to General Motors and Volkswagen.
This is, David, this is amazing. Your experience, we could speak for hours. What we're going to do is I'll finish off with that last point about this year and how COVID has changed the supply chain landscape. And just a heads up for our class, you can start putting your questions into the chat room, or if you want to ask questions audibly, please don't hesitate to jump in, because this is all for you. And we're just so grateful that David can join us tonight. So David, just let's get on to this year. Like, how has COVID changed the supply chain landscape from your viewpoint in how you have been working with your clients?
Well, let's go into the first thing. COVID made it so that people can't travel. And when people can't travel, they lose their security, because it's really nice when you have your engineer traveling from Germany to China or to wherever to make sure that everything's okay. Well, because people can't travel, the realization has come down that many people don't have systems. The supply chain system stinks. And by the way, this is really good for me. I'm making a lot more money because of this. Because the supply chain systems stink, they have to call my company and say, you have people who live in China. Can you go to the factories for us? So we've actually had a pretty good year.
Wow.
And the reason we had a pretty good year is because people stink. And the system stinks.
Right.
They don't have a system. It's horrible. So they need people like us to go do it for them. I mean, I answer probably about 20-25 emails a day from people saying,
wow,
what can I do? What can I do? And here's the system. Here's what I mean by the system. You guys are supply chain people. I don't know if that means one day you want to be in purchasing, you want to be in logistics, you want to be in the multiple areas of supply chain. But let's just say, for example, you're in purchasing. If you're in purchasing, your person, the person you're buying from might be the lowest price supplier, but is he the lowest cost supplier? And this is the other thing that people have learned from COVID. Price and cost are not the same thing. I can get something for $10, and please don't mind me always talking in American money. Makes my wife mad. I've lived out of the United States for over 30 years, and I still talk about, and I'm 60 some years old, and I still talk about dollars. So pardon me for that. But let's say you buy something for $10, and you buy 1,000 of them, 20% of them are no good. So now you got to return them, get new ones, things like that. The overall cost of ownership of that product could then be, instead of $10, maybe it's $13 or $14. But there's a guy who's going to sell it to you for $12. Generally speaking, purchasing goes, I got to get the cheapest price. But do you have the best cost? And this is an analysis you can make. Most people call it the total cost of ownership. There's other expressions for it. But this is where your intellect, your intelligence, and your abilities come into play. Yeah, but these people break down. A lot of people have poor maintenance in their factory. So the factory only is running 80-85% of the time. And by the way, that's pretty high. I know some factories only run 40-45% of the time. I mean, people are always there, but the machines are always breaking down because they don't maintain them. And by the way, if you ever fly anywhere, think about that. Would you get on an airplane if you knew the airline only had an 80% uptime? That means 20% of the planes crashed. I don't think anybody'd get on it. So why would you buy a product from them? You know, they should have good maintenance. They should have the ability to do things. This is that total cost of ownership. And by the way, it doesn't matter if you're a big customer or a small one. In fact, as a small company, which I am, you know, small things really affect us. Whereas in big companies, they can absorb some of that. You know, if you're working for a smaller company, your analysis of that total cost of ownership might be huge. It might be the difference between that company going out of business or staying in business. So the COVID has exposed an awful lot of people and has exposed an awful lot of poor purchasing systems, poor ERP systems, really poor quality systems, all of which, by the way, in the supply chain thing, you're a part of. One of the things that's good about supply chain is you're involved in manufacturing, you're involved in purchasing, you're involved in cost analysis, maintenance analysis, quality analysis, warranty analysis. You know, you really have the ability and even engineering, because you're going to be able to find people who are going to do something that the engineering team wants to be done. You know, can this person actually make a skateboard that flies? By the way, I have a customer asking me that. Okay, they have a design for a skateboard that flies, and they're asking us to help them. So, you know, we tried to explain to them some of the problems with that. You have to have very high, you know, now you're getting into the airline industry almost. And I worked for the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter, the newest stealth jet. I helped set up their line back in 2006.
Wow.
And you know, that kind of precision is unbelievable. So these are the things that I think is exciting about your field of work, that you have all kinds of things you can do with that. So this is some of the things that COVID exposed. COVID exposed people who don't have systems. And COVID helped me make more money, which is a good thing. Although I can't travel too much.
And you've been out of China for most of this year, David.
I was only in China for 2 weeks in January. Then I came to Taiwan. Then I had to go to France for a customer. Then I got stuck in the United Arab Emirates. We have a lot of business in the Middle East now. The Middle East is running out of oil, so they're starting to set up manufacturing, which is a really good thing for us. That's why we have a company there. We're building a factory in Qatar. We're building another factory in Saudi Arabia, and we're working with 3 companies in UAE. I'm going to go back there next week to the UAE just because I have to. I'm going to have to sit for about 4 days in quarantine and have a test, but I have to go back for our customers.
It strikes me that the big theme that you are, it's coming up time again. What you're talking about is the systems. The system, putting the systems in place, and COVID has exposed that. So do you think going forward, like 2021, 22, things are going to be different in how supply chains are managed?
The answer to that is, I hope so. This is my 4th pandemic that I've been part of. Everybody thinks this is new. You guys are young, but I don't know if you knew, but in 2009, in Mexico, the US, we had the big swine flu pandemic. And I think it was in 2001 or 3 or something like that.
3. Yep.
SARS happened. And then there was another Hong Kong flu back in the 90s. And then when I was a kid, there was a bunch. I mean, this whole pandemic thing happens all the time. I have a very negative thought about how people learn. I think most people, and this is where you as young people have an opportunity, most people get focused on what they know. So you go to work, you learn something. Let's say you learn something really good in the first 5 years, and then you don't learn anymore after that. You continue where you are. The key to success is constant learning. If you're willing to constantly learn and constantly adjust what you know to the learning that you do, you will be highly successful. But sadly for me, and by the way, statistically, only about 25% of the world can constantly learn. 75% doesn't. This is based on some studies of some psychologists from way back. So be a learner. Force yourself. Don't just sit back there and say, wow, we did a really good job in 2020 because I had a boss who used to tell me all the great job they did back in the 1960s, and it just used to crack me up. Good. I'm glad you did a good job in the 90s. It's not working now. You know? And I'm 62 years old, and I can tell you something. I learn something new every day because I'm open-minded enough to learn. I'm stubborn enough to push things that I think are right. And then if I'm wrong, then I change. You got to be a little bit both. I mean, if you're managing people, you have to know what you're doing. And by the way, don't be afraid to make mistakes, please. This is one of the things I'm going to tell you negatively. Asian people seem not to like to make mistakes because you come from a culture that always seems to be afraid of losing face or making mistakes. And I don't know if it's so bad in Malaysia like it is in China and stuff like that. People are just afraid of making mistakes in China. And because they're afraid of making mistakes, a lot of bad things happen. If I could tell you the number of mistakes I made, we would have to be here for a couple of years. So making mistakes is okay. You learn. We have an expression in the US, if you're trying to learn how to ski and you never fall down, you never learn how to ski.
Yeah, I hear you. Let's, we have, Elaine's asked an interesting question, and now's your chance to take some risk, students, making mistakes with your questioning. That is, can you type in, each of you type in a question in the chat room, question that you have on your mind. So let's fill up the chat room. Otherwise, I'll ask you directly. So let's, while you're doing that, we'll warm up David's thought processes with a question from Elaine pertaining to this current pandemic. Won't the excess inventory prior to the outbreak help the firms fulfill orders during the lockdown and factories, when factories were shut down?
Elaine, that's a great question, and you got me on that one. The answer is yes. Of course it helped.
Yes.
You know, I mean, I would be stupid to tell you it didn't. But I will also say that it's a short-time help, not a long-term help, but you are correct. Of course, people who had some extra stuff sitting around were able to do things other people didn't, because again, if you do the kind of supply chain I'm talking about, one break in the link messes up everything.
Right.
Okay. So Elaine is totally correct with that. It's impossible to argue with that question.
Yeah,
it's true.
Some more questions. Otherwise, I'll start picking out some names. Who would like to ask the next question? It's Sarah. Have you got a question there?
I'm still formulating my question. Hold on, give me a few
Okay,
minutes.
no problem.
And by the way, ask me anything. Like if it's not even about supply chain, you want to understand about your career or business, feel free.
Yes. Okay. Joey asked, just wondering, but in terms of factory relocation, you mentioned considering multiple factors such as network of supply infrastructure and reputation risk. But what would be the #1 top consideration for companies looking to relocate?
So Joey, that's a good question because of many reasons. So there are some companies, and Taiwanese companies are particularly bad about this. And I hate to be nationalistic, but I tell my wife this all the time. They like to follow the cheap labor. They don't like to change their systems. So you see people like Taiwan was cheap back in the 80s and 90s. Then the Taiwanese moved to China. Now the Taiwanese are moving to Vietnam, and they're moving to Africa and things like that. So one of the biggest reasons is labor, and that is the worst reason to move around is labor cost. And I give you just a very specific example of the country of Germany. Their labor is probably the most expensive labor in the world, fully loaded, which includes all the benefits and things like that. But yet they produce that high efficiency, high cost, high profitability, many things. The United States is the most efficient country in the world in GDP per person. And it's almost 6 times more efficient than China, for example. So you get these people who don't want to think, and they'll move. I'm recommending to many of my clients to stay in China because the Chinese economy has 1.4 billion people, and only about 300 to 400 million of them are actually active in the economy at this point in time. There's a billion more people to grow. Now, if you're going to a country because, like I have a British company who's moving to China because that's their biggest market right now, and we're going to build a factory for them, they're doing it for all the right reasons. They're doing it because their customer base is close to the factory. And that should be really the real thing. If you're making cars, you should make cars close to where the cars are. If you're making hair dryers, you should make hair dryers where the people are. You're making furniture, you know, shipping costs a lot of money. So, you know, if you're making furniture in China and shipping it to the United States, where if you could make it in Mexico and ship it to the United States, it makes more sense to make it in Mexico at this point in time, because labor rates in Mexico and China are pretty compatible. So
just associated with that, David, do you think that the trade war has it become more of a media event rather than an economic decision that companies had to make? Okay.
I think it's, by the way, I think COVID is much more immediate, a media event too. I tell you, I travel all over the world. I've only met 2 people in all my travels who have even had the virus. So I'm assuming more people know about it than I do, or maybe I'm just dumb. But I think the trade war is important for 2 reasons. The trade war is important because the United States and Europe are now saying to China and other places that, listen, intellectual property is important. And if you didn't see, and a lot of people didn't notice this, when Trump put on the first 25%, China said, oh, we'll give you $800 billion, you know, we'll make up the money. And the US said, no, we don't want your money. We want to protect our intellectual property, because intellectual property is worth, you know, trillions of dollars a year. You know, and what the Chinese have done, and they continue to do it, there was just another example just yesterday that came out, is they joint venture with a company. One of my biggest clients is a company called Air Liquide. They're the largest manufacturer of air products. So what they do is they split air into its components, hydrogen, oxygen, and sell those things. They're my largest customer. They have a factory in China, and we're building a new one for them. And they have the factory in the United Arab Emirates, which is what started me going there. So they had a partner in China, because the only way they could go into China is to have a partner. Then the partner understood all their intellectual property and split away from them.
Wow.
They essentially stole the intellectual property, which in the West, and I believe in Indonesia and India, is illegal. You can't do that. Companies are protected, but in some, so the trade war is more about that. And this is a benefit to the world, I think, overall, because a strong China with good intellectual properties and things like that will be a good partner for the world. There's a lot of smart people there. And if they're not stealing intellectual property, but they're bringing intellectual property to the game, I think the people will be happy.
Interesting. Emma asked the question. You mentioned the system is much more important than cultural differences, but is there any cases that cultural factors impact on designing or planning for the system?
The answer to that is, of course, yes. There are things, you know, like culturally, for example, poor countries have a tendency to have people who are more interested in listening to the boss and not being extremely independent on their own. China's a very good example of this, and so is Mexico. I've been in meetings in China where the boss speaks for 2.5 hours and the people just how, which means okay, you know. And what ends up happening is nobody says anything. So when you design systems like that, you have to design systems where people aren't, if people find mistakes and the boss said that he wants it that way, in China, for example, the people won't go to the boss and say, hey, boss, you made a mistake. Whereas in the US, we go right to the boss and say, hey, you screwed up. In Europe, they would do the same. In Australia, they would do the same. So yes, frequently you have to design the systems a little bit differently, because if there's a mistake in some countries, culturally, it's good for the people to come say to the boss or to somebody, hey, there's a mistake here, let's fix it, let's do this. In some countries, there's not. So what you try to do is you try to set up the system in countries where it's not, so that that mistake can get flashed up quicker to the manager, which is a waste of time, by the way, because let's say the manager has 30 people working for them, then there's this waste of time that the manager has to see it before he goes and instructs everybody to fix it. Whereas in places where, and the Japanese are very good at this, Toyota says, push the responsibility to the lowest possible level. And that's really intelligent. You give the responsibility to the lowest possible level. And when you do that, that lowest possible person, one, has a good feeling about themselves. Morale is a very important thing in a company, because they know they're making a difference, which is great. And they'll grow their own career. They're probably young people at that point in time, learning and growing. And they don't always have to go ask for the boss's permission to change something, which is really, really bad.
Wow.
So, but yeah, you do have to design for that. Of course you do, and you have to think about it. That's totally true.
Sarah asks, when it comes to inventory management, what are the main ways for companies to ensure that they don't have excess inventory when, for example, they already have an agreement with a certain supplier to send products in batches at a minimum quantity to lower cost? Is the solution to change the supplier?
It can be, or you can set up what we call a Kanban system. And Kanban is a Japanese word. I don't know if it's a Japanese word. It's a Japanese system. I don't speak Japanese. But anyways, a Kanban system is where you do minimum and maximums. So basically what you try to do is, through your different work that you're doing, you find the maximum amount of product you'll need at any given time, and the minimum amount you'll need at any given time. And that's usually called the safety stock. I mean, you always will have some safety stock. You know, going back to what Elaine asked a little bit before, you go into this thing where it says, you know, do these people who have this, they had safety stock, maybe too much, but they were able to do stuff. Yeah, you have a little bit of safety stock in place. Everybody will do that just in case a truck breaks down, you know, there's a hurricane or something like that, you know, some weather event or whatever. You have some safety stock, and that's your min. And then you'll go after it. If you have suppliers that can't meet those kinds of requirements, you have two choices. You change supplier, or do what Toyota did, which was really great. Toyota had a group of people that went out and trained the suppliers on what to do. It was an incredibly great idea. And it's one of the reasons why Toyota was so excellent, is they actually went and taught their suppliers how to do the things we're talking about. You know, how to do the Toyota production system, how to keep your inventory low, how to do things. And they worked with their suppliers, and they didn't charge anybody for it. They worked with them. And this was a brilliant idea that many more companies are starting to do.
Do you think
work with your suppliers?
Do you think I can see that, and that, you know, across industries, not just automotive, but do you think, does that obfuscate the need for, say, Toyota to multi-source components because they have a better relationship, one supplier, they don't need to worry about not having that supplier meet their needs when they need it?
Oh yeah, that is the $1 million question for many, many companies. So in the auto industry, we do not multi-source at all.
Interesting.
We single source. A supplier gets into what we call the automotive thing. So the 1996 Dodge Durango, which is when I was plant manager of that factory,
right,
had one person to make the seats, one person to make the interiors, one person
Wow.
that made the tires. But we did what we called, what my company calls, we set it up, what we call it the 5th level of supply chain. I can send this to Neil so you can say it. And what that means is you're full partners. Not only can the supplier supply you the part, but we used to reward the supplier for coming into our factory and telling us how to make it better.
Wow.
giving us ideas on how to change the product that we engineered. The Dodge Durango was the second product to use what was called SCORE, S-C-O-R-E, in Chrysler, and the suppliers saved us $1.5 billion on costs. $1.5 billion US on costs by coming up with new ideas to help us do things. And if you guys are interested in this, I can send Neil all the data on SCORE. The Harvard Business Review did a very excellent article on SCORE.
Right.
My factory was the second one. And we gave the factory, so we talked about cost and price before, right? So we would
Yes.
give the suppliers points for saving money for us.
Wow.
And those points were towards getting the next product line in the corporation. So let's say another product was coming up the year after ours started. Usually a car line works for about 6 to 7 years and then you change over. So if you get it, you got solid business. These guys would build factories right next to our factory for the just-in-time. I mean, our seat factory was only 15 minutes away from our factory by walking, you know. So they would just put stuff into a truck and load it up and take it right over. So it was just in time. Same with the interior, same with the engine.
That's kind of like a loyalty program, isn't it, David? That suppliers go from bronze, silver, and gold, depending on how well they're performing. And when they get to a gold, and this in other industry it happens where IKEA does this. Some of the top fashion brands do this with their suppliers, where they get to a higher level, then the actual brand actually allows that supplier to have more access to the manufacturing and future forecast revisions and things like that.
Listen, we allowed, exactly, this is exactly correct. We allowed some suppliers who were really good, they were part of the design of the new vehicle. Some of the paint suppliers, the mold suppliers, things like that, they could help us because, you know, some things you can't mold. So, you know, the design team says this and they go, yeah, but that'll never work. So, you know, they work around it. They figure out a way to make a very beautiful design that can be productionizable. That's all part of the supply chain, by the way.
What about tire suppliers?
Same.
One of our students works for Continental. Dan George, is that right? Correct me.
Yep. Continental tires.
Continental tires, yes.
So tire suppliers in particular were very big for us because when you're building an SUV or a pickup truck or something like that, that has a frame. Cars are made unibody, so there's no frame, but trucks and stuff have a frame, so they're much stronger. Jeeps have a frame. And the reason tire suppliers then are there because if the tire isn't matched correctly to all the tires in the same group, we call it tire matching, then the truck or the whatever can pull to the left or right. So, you know, having a single tire supplier that sells the tire can mix match the tires to us. So when we got a batch of 4 tires, we were told these 4 tires go together on this vehicle and they will be balanced totally properly for your vehicle.
Just something curious. Dan, any comments on that or question?
No comments on that. I mean, what he said is actually very true. So
yeah, just a curiosity point on that, David. How come tires always, the width of tires is measured in metric, but the actual size of the tire is always in terms of imperial? Did you ever notice that?
Yeah, I don't know why.
It's fun.
I really don't.
It's the only product
I actually asked also at Continental itself, even they had no idea why.
Yeah, it's interesting.
It's one of those things, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just stuff.
Right. And I think part of your message tonight, David, is being curious about these things is it's part of the medicine for continuous learning. You know,
Correct.
You see things I'm curious about this, and you want to know why it is what it is. And thank you, David. We're coming up to the top of the hour, so we'll do a couple more questions, and we've got Abby. Abby asks a nice question. Hi, David. The system you mentioned, is it towards professional services like consultation, or is it more towards automated system, which you utilize technology to automate the system? I assume we're talking about your.
The answer is yes. So automation is wonderful, but automation, be clear. And they talk about AI and stuff, and honestly, there's still no such thing as real AI. I mean, artificial intelligence, maybe it'll work someday. I don't know. But I have my son's best friend was one of the designers of Twitter. He's a genius, and he has his own company now, and he's a multi-millionaire, and he's only 38 years old, but he is married, so don't call me about him. He does not believe that artificial intelligence will ever take the place of that. So professional systems that work really, really well help you, like good ERP systems, okay? You know, an enterprise system that will help you. Those kinds of systems are wonderful, but they're never as good as the inputs coming from smart people who will help you. So professional services like me, I'll be honest with you. Everybody asks me, my people always used to say, oh, these people are so stupid. I go, that's why they hire us. If they were smart, they wouldn't need us. Okay. I mean, my whole company rests on the fact that people are dumb. Let's be clear. You know, they don't understand what they're doing, and they don't understand what's going on. And that's not totally true, but because I used to bring in a consultant every 2 years into my factories, because people have a tendency to start going down a single path because they get used to it. And it's really good to get an outside approach. So I would bring in a consulting company for 3 months and have them just tear us to shreds and not allow my people to make excuses. Just learn, listen, write notes. And then after the consulting company left, we would talk about how we could improve. I think there's always going to be that. There's always going to be people. Yes, systems now help you do a lot of things very fast, very nice, no doubt. But your intellect and ability will make those systems hum. Because I have been in factories that had the best systems on the planet, the most expensive, billions of dollars worth of systems. And because the management stunk, the factory stunk. And I worked in a factory that had the lowest systems possible. It was a dump, but our management was good, and we made very good product.
Wow, amazing. Elaine, what are we up to? Here we go. Okay, Dan George, our tire guy. Which industry supply chain do you think would be able to recover best from the impact of COVID-19?
I think both electronics and automotive, just simply because once you turn the keys, it'll go right away. Automotive in particular, because it's just in time. So yes, you know, again, going back to Elaine's question, they didn't have stuff and they couldn't run till everybody runs. But once it all starts running, recovers quite quickly. Electronics is a little hard because electronics really is not a very good industry. Their manufacturing and supply chain capability stinks, in my opinion, and I've gone to a lot of them, and I've worked for two. Their whole thing is on the wonderful design of product they make. They're not very good at supply chain and manufacturing. They're trying to get better, and all. But I think automotive will come back fast. Aerospace the slowest,
right? Just
because of need. And of course, anything else that's easy, like hairbrushes and stuff, that'll go quick.
Elaine asks, hi, David, do you mind to provide any good recommendations for the supply chains in the tire industry?
The biggest thing for the supply chain in the tire industry is the ability to make product. Again, tire industry supply chain comes right down to capability. Some of the tire groups that we worked with that weren't so good, and I won't name names because Dan's there, and some of them aren't his company, and he'll laugh. Some of them just come down to quality. Good tires, good quality, good innovation. Again, innovation is very critical in things like tires and things like that. So, you know, I don't know if you've seen, there's now run flat tires, and now there's even coming out some tires that can't be flat.
Wow.
But are still just as soft and things like that. I mean, this is innovation that's through the roof. I mean, we're getting to the point where you won't have to go change out a flat pretty soon.
Wow.
I would say that's in the next 5 or 10 years, no flats. So I would say innovation. Tire suppliers are quite frankly, tire suppliers are pretty old, most of them. You know, if you think of most tire suppliers and you know who they are, they're 100-year-old companies, most of them.
Do you think that, is it considered a dirty industry? So governments won't allow any new innovation in that area?
It's very dirty. I mean,
Yeah.
it's mostly oil that makes the tire.
Right.
You ever see a tire fire? I mean, it's unbelievably dirty. No, but governments, you know, people say that governments won't allow things in. That's not true. I was the guy who worked on the water-based paint back in the 1980s, before any of you were born. And we took paint from putting out 100 pounds of volatile organic compounds per hour down to less than 5 by putting in water-based paint. And the things that me and my team worked on, I was 29. And I mean, it's really what launched my career. Is we set up the processes for water-based paint, and every car company and supplier in the world uses the processes we set up.
Wow.
Now, nobody cares about that. I mean, it's not something that, you know, I can sit there and say to people and go, wow, that's great. But, you know, it's just things that happen, people do. So, yeah, there's a lot of innovation, and you can have a very clean environment. I do a lot of talks in China about having clean industries, and every industry can be clean. It's a bunch of crap when they say they can't. They can't because they don't try.
Right. Zoel asks question, do you think multinational companies should move their production into China, considering the country has set out the China 2025 plan?
I look at only 3 things, okay? Let's be clear. Cost, quality, and delivery. Does China have a situation with taxes and regulations that allow you to want to build a factory there? Yes or no? And do they have the delivery, which is the people who are going to come there? All these plans that politicians put up, China 2025, you know, the US always has some stupid plan and all that. That's so government people can get elected and keep making money off of companies. You know, look at the realistic things. You know, what are the safety standards? What are the environmental standards? Can you meet the environmental standards, or they have so many hundreds of environmental standards that they're impossible to meet because you got to spend $500,000 just to write up the paperwork, you know? Or can you just go do the environmental properly and make the air clean, which is what you should be doing? You know, these are the things that matter. What are the real regulations and laws? Companies need to do 3 things. They need to make good quality at a good cost and deliver it on time so they can make money. Simple as that. Don't make it more complicated.
Okay, Ahmad asks a question. I've come across a new platform to share warehousing for different companies, much like Airbnb for warehousing. Do you think this idea can be a thing for a factory too, especially for small businesses in the coming years?
Yeah, for sure. That's a great idea. I mean, who wants to own, you know, that 25% I told you was part of the cost of inventory? Some of that is the square meters you own to hold the inventory in.
Wow.
I mean, the land costs money, the building costs money, the fire protection and all the things cost money. So yeah, that's a great idea. If you can do that and move things around, again, as long as it's within a distance that you can get it to your factory in time from a warehousing. And usually that number, most people say, is like 4 hours, you know, a 4-hour distance, because that's way a truck can make 2 trips back and forth in an 8-hour shift or something like that. And that's a general number. It could be more, it could be less, depending on what the product is. But yeah, I think something like that's a great idea. I haven't heard that before. That's a really good idea.
Ahmad, that's brilliant.
Right.
You've got them thinking well tonight, David. This is great.
Yeah.
Sarah asks a question. Do you think just-in-time inventory is something that is possible to be put in place for all companies or only certain industries?
So the answer is to use common sense. That question has been gone over many times in the automotive industry. So let's say, for example, with seats just-in-time inventory, a truck can hold about 20 sets of seats for 20 cars, so 20 minutes worth of production. Just-in-time inventory for seats and engines, things like that works out very well. But you got all that handful of screws, right? Do you think just-in-time inventory is good for screws, or is it better to ship in 5 boxes of screws that are only, you know, only weigh a couple kilos and have them there in front of your face? So screws, you would just, you know, throw them in, because it's ridiculous to try to just-in-time inventory screws. But for bigger things and things like that, I think, you know, it's good. And I think you can see, what I mean. There's some common sense in just-in-time inventory. Some people say, oh, we want one-piece flow, just-in-time inventory for nothing. That's dumb. Sarah's right about that. I mean, it just won't work. You know, there are some things that are good. So, but just-in-time works extremely well. The hotel industry and the hospital industry are now starting to use it.
Wow.
You know, because hospitals used to hold drugs, all kinds of drugs, all kinds of other things, all kinds of stuff. And now you see the hospital industry is going to lean principles. It's quite interesting.
And being challenged this year with PPE, but we
yes,
it's just a blip in their learning, I'm sure. Yishang asks, hi, David. Seeing that many companies are shifting their factories out of China recently, do you think they will consider moving back into China in the near future?
The answer is yes, I do. And here's why. I think as the growth of the Chinese middle class grows, Standard Chartered Bank predicted about 4 years ago that the middle class would grow by 350 million people in the next 15 years. Now think about that. That's the size of the United States, about 350 million people. That it would grow the middle class, and middle class are what buys things. Rich people don't buy things because there's not enough of them. Poor people don't buy things because they can't afford it. It's the middle class that buys everything. I mean, they're where you make your money. And as the Chinese middle class grows, I think a lot of people are going to have to move back into China. That's why I tell a lot of my customers it's silly to move out of China. You know, you're starting to get a thing, and this is one thing China's finally starting to do, is trying to drive, you know, internal consumption. This is what Indonesia's trying to do, Malaysia's trying to do right now, and the building of the middle class. Now, there's only one problem with building the middle class, and I'll make one political statement. Middle class people vote. Middle class people care. Rich people, they'll go with the government. Poor people don't have enough clout to do anything. When you get the middle class, that's what shoves governments to do good things for people. That's why the United States and most of Western Europe, Australia and stuff are so successful, because they have a huge middle class. It's why people like Mexico, the rich people as a percent of population, 10%, middle class like 4%, and the poor is the rest, you know, which is like what China's like and others. So some countries don't want the middle class to grow. This is what really creates good business and good money and good wealth and good happiness for everybody, because middle class is a threat to authoritarian governments.
Just related to that question, Joanne asks, to what extent does factory shifting out of China affect your business, David? Clients are
it's all good. It's all good. Whenever people make change, this is what my business is all about, making change. So that's why we've set ourselves up in Indonesia, in Vietnam and other places. We have the lean manufacturing principles. We'll go anywhere, any place, anytime. And
including Malaysia?
Oh yeah, we have accounts in Malaysia right now.
Okay. That's good.
I've never been to Malaysia, but I got a consultant there who's doing some work with a furniture factory.
Oh, very good. Okay.
Yeah.
Jason asks, hi, David, is your company hiring?
Yes, we are. Yes, we are. And we will be more actually in the next few months. We just made some hiring and we will be hiring. Especially if you're in Indonesia and Malaysia, we're looking for people. India, we just signed a joint venture with an Indian engineering company who we're working together to get business in India. And then, of course, the Middle East loves people from Southeast Asia. And so because most of the people in the Middle East that are Middle Easterners, they're rich. They don't work too hard, but they like people to come and help them work.
Okay.
And it's good business for all of us.
Thank you, David. That's great. And Zihan asks, hi, David. First of all, thank you for your time and giving us a really practical insights here. From your perspective, what is the biggest challenge for Southeast Asian countries to build up a global supply chain ecosystem?
The ability of the people to want to do the work. The government has to make it so that companies want to come. They have to make a business-friendly environment. So if there's a business-friendly environment, I think the companies will come. And to me, in Southeast Asia, there's many business-friendly environments. I haven't seen any that aren't so business-friendly. Some countries like Vietnam, for example, it's an incredibly complicated business-friendly environment to set up a company. Like I can set up a company in the United States in less than 30 minutes. I get online, I pay the fee, I have the company, and the company can do anything. In some countries, you have to designate what your company is going to do to be a company. So you have a lot of things. China's like that. You have to say, I'm a consulting company, I'm a manufacturing company, I'm a finance company. The US makes it really easy. You can just set up a company and do whatever you want as long as you pay the taxes off of your earnings.
Amazing.
You know, and most other places are like that. So I think government's making it open so people can do things. Shenzhen, for example, did a really good job with that. Like in Shanghai, it would take 3 months to set up a company. We're a Shenzhen company because it took 4 days to set up a company in Shenzhen versus Shanghai.
Wow.
Because I live by Shanghai. So it should have been in Shanghai, but we set it up in Shenzhen.
There you go. Well, David, you've been really, really nice to give us your time and such short notice. Class, what do you think? Can we give David a hand?
Oh, thank you very much. And if you ever want to talk, just ask Neil to give you my email address. I'd be happy to take emails from you. It's great to meet people who want to grow and do things. It's always a nice thing for that.
Here, David. This is great. And David, thanks so much again. Regards to your wife, and we'll catch you on another call.
All right. I enjoyed this very much. Thank you all for your great questions. Bye-bye.
Okay. Cheers.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, David.
Thank you. Bye.